Well, as the controversy over the hate speech by BJP lawmakers, including an MP, intensifies, joining us on NDTV now is former Supreme Court Judge Justice Madan Lokur. Justice Lokur, thank you for joining us, sir. Can I first ask you about this latest story that is making headlines? A member of parliament, no less, calling for the boycott of an entire community. What do you make of it?
Yeah, thank you, Nidhi, for inviting me for this program. It's actually shocking that these kind of statements are being made. And this is not the first time that this gentleman has made this kind of a statement. He has made similar statements. Well, not boycott kind of statements, but hate speech kind of statements. So it's really shocking that, these statements are being made and that no action is being taken to prevent such statements being made.
I'm reading one of your old quotes, in fact, something you recently said, and you said the problem is not that there is a shortage of laws, the problem is that these laws are not being effectively executed or effectively implemented. In other words, you don't really see the need for a separate law on hate speech because you're saying it already exists.
Yes, in fact, this is what the Supreme Court has said. It's not that I've said it. The Supreme Court says that there is enough, legislation to tackle hate speech. Right, so you don't need a separate law for this.
The question, though, is, what does one do when one sees, for example, the police in this case, filing a case not against the hate speech itself, but the fact that this was an event that was called without due permission? When our own institutions and agencies act so partisan, so blatantly, what does one make of it?
Yeah, it's actually, Nidhi, it's very difficult to say what's going on. The police don't act, and if they act against the wrong person. All right. So, what does one do in a situation like this? Fortunately, about the hate speech aspect, the matter is pending in the Supreme Court. I hope the Supreme Court looks into it, and lays down the law and says that some action has to be taken. You can't have, people who make hate speech getting away with it, and people who are saying something completely innocuous, being put behind bars for sedition or something else.
But Justice Lokur, as you pointed out, this is a question the Supreme Court has dealt with in the past. If you could take us through that briefly, in terms of the fact that the Supreme Court has over the years tried to define public order, hate speech, what in fact even constitutes sedition. But on the ground, we always saw a pushback, even to that, people still getting arrested for frivolous reasons, like you mentioned, even for on sedition, etc. So how has the Supreme Court dealt with this issue in particular of hate speech?
Yes, you see, the Supreme Court had taken, I think, the correct view way back in 2004 in the case of Praveen Togadia, who had made some, inflammatory speeches. And he was invited for some program in Karnataka, and the district authority said, listen, we are not going to let you enter this district because of, the hate speeches that you made in the past, or communally inflammatory speeches that you made in the past. That was challenged. But the Supreme Court said that, there is enough material to stop him from entering that particular district because of his past conduct. So really there the Supreme Court took a very pragmatic view. In the recent past, the Supreme Court has also taken the view that you must have you must look at the content of the speech, you must have a look at the intent of the speech or whatever is said, and you must have a look at the impact that it is likely to cause. All right. So, for example, if a researcher, says something as a part of his research, he says that, well, this is what was said. The content is inflammatory. Okay, but the intent is not, because he's doing research, he or she is doing research on the subject. But if you have a situation like this, then there's a problem, because the content is inflammatory, the intent is inflammatory. The impact, the Supreme Court had earlier taken the view that the impact need not necessarily be violent. The impact can also be psychological, it can also be emotional. The persons who are being targeted with the hate speech they might undergo some kind of trauma, right? Psychological.
So that's
emotional.
a very wide-ranging definition, actually.
Right, but in the more recent judgment, the Supreme Court has, in my view, taken a step backward by saying that there must be some element of violence that must form a part of the impact, right? So that, I think, in my view, is not correct. It need not necessarily lead to violence, because it can have a psychological impact on a person. It can have a psychological impact on a community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In fact, you spoke about the Supreme Court. The High Court of Delhi recently, if you remember, said that, if it's said with a smile, there is no criminality. I mean, that was outrageous. What did you think of that when it came?
Yeah, well, when I first read it, I remembered what had been said by Shakespeare: one may smile and still be a villain, right? So whether you smile or whether you don't smile, it makes absolutely no difference at all. I think it's a very wrong statement to have been made by the High Court.
But finally, Justice Lokur, I think my question really is that, given that the Supreme Court has stepped into this issue in detail in the past, and yet this continues to happen, ultimately, even now with the court hearing the matter, will it really put an end to it, unless there is a political will to put an end to it?
Yes. You see, the law has to be implemented. I mean, we are living in a society which is governed by the rule of law. And if the law is not implemented, like the Supreme Court has said, the law is there. All that you have to do is implement it. Now, if the authorities decide that we are not going to implement the law, what can anybody do? It's not only on a matter of hate speech, it's a matter on any law. Supposing a murder takes place and the police say, no, we are not going to do anything about it. What is a citizen supposed to do? Or if some lady gets raped and she goes to the police station and the police says, well, we are not going to do anything about it. What is she going to do? So the law has to be implemented. I mean, there can't be two questions about it,
It has to be, but it often isn't, as we've seen is the case. Justice Lokur, thank you for joining us. I don't know if one is as optimistic as you are that the Supreme Court may actually put an end to this.